Hello everyone, welcome to my How to Paint Beasts of Chaos Herdstone. And as always, here's the colour chart conversion for the paints I use into the GW range. As you can see, I've already assembled the model and I've kept the base separate from the actual main pillar. I've put the horns and everything on and attached some of the side skeletons. I've left off all the sticks and chains and the fire, or the little pieces that can be put on later. This is just easier to do them separate. So I primed the model with Chaos Black Spray and then dusted over the top of it with Corax White. This just gives me the pre-shades, and as you can see from underneath it's nice and dark, and then from the top it's quite bright, obviously where the whites just hit the upper areas. So I apply medium sea grey from Vallejo model colour as the base coat through the airbrush across the stone itself. I get the main pillar and the base that it stands in with this colour. So next I apply Model Air Vallejo, light grey. This is the top of all the rocks and the top of the pillar, just to give it the sort of the natural brightness from the top down look. Again, through the airbrush, get some nice soft gradients down. I mean, this can all be done with light dry brushing. I mean, later on I will put some dry brushes down as well, but this is just to get the initial gradient colours set down on the model. I start shading the underside of the rocky areas with Model Air German Grey. So next up I dry brushed all of the stone and rock areas with Longbeard Grey, the dry paint from Games Workshop. Once I dry brushed the two halves, I put them together just to sort of see how the overall model was looking once the shades are all put down, and then I move on to doing some washes over all the stone. This will be a Nuln oil with a lot of medium mixed in with it, with a little spot of soft tone army painter, or you could put a little bit of Agrax in it. I just didn't want it completely black, I wanted a slight bit of brown in there. Not really that noticeable, but it across like the larger surfaces, you know, you can see that it is present. So it's really thin, and I'm just using a bit more water there to just pull it out a lot, you know, across the larger areas. I don't want it to pool anywhere, so you'll see me picking up the wash and then, you know, bringing it back into areas where there's a bit less. I want to keep the gradients that the airbrush work put down. So this is a very, very thin wash. You can see it just slightly tints the top colour, and then just sort of frames the weapons and stuff where it sits against the recesses there. But like I said, nice and thin, just to tint and sort of take away the dry brushed look and the airbrushed look as well. This sort of acts like a glaze as well over the top of the stone areas. So while that was drying, I moved on to the skeletons and the bone on the model. I painted these with Zandri dust. So I went ahead and painted the ropes as well as the bones with Zandri dust. Later on when I wash these, I can put a different layer over the top of them just to change the colour, but the base coat is now down on those. So next up I use P3 cold steel, and I put this on all of the blades and metal on the base and on the Herdstone. There's a couple of little sort of metal brackets that the chains hold into, and also painted the chains at the same time. I then picked out the rest of the metal areas with Balthasar gold. I then painted the Stormcast parts and some of the other small items with the Retributor armour. I picked out some more of the details with Scale 75 Deep Red, or the equivalent would be P3 Sanguine Base. The GW colour is a little bit of an awkward one to do. Sort of Doomball brown with some Khorne red, sort of 50-50 mix, just to get that sort of nice deep browny red. After that I painted the sticks and bits of wood on the base with Scale 75 Dubai Brown. So I made a wash from Agrax Earthshade and a little bit of soft tone again in there, lots of medium, and then I'm just going to put this over all of the metal parts on the base, the skulls, the ropes, the wood, basically all the details we picked out before are just going to get this sort of generic brown wash over them all. It'll tie them all in, it'll give them all a bit of shading, it'll take the shine off the metal to make it look a bit more sort of old and scavenged, which it kind of is on this model. It's not all brand new bits of equipment, it's all stuff I guess in the Beastmen have all sort of salvaged over time. So yeah, go ahead and put the wash over all the metal, and remember to get the chains and the sticks and the bits of support wood that hold up the actual Herdstone itself. Using Scale 75 Soul Yellow, I base coated the flames around the skulls in the little fire pit. Using the airbrush with Scale 75 Mars Orange, I applied the first shade to the tops of the fire. I then applied Khorne Red through the airbrush. And then using a bit of black, I darkened down the very top of the fire. And next up I thinned down some Fuegan orange and applied that over the whole of the fire bit. Ignored the skulls, so try not to overlap onto those. A little bit on the tops of them, just sort of glaze the orange over, but obviously keep it out of the sockets and the actual sort of main bulk of the skull itself. So using deep red, we're going to dry brush in the fire pit area on both the pillar and the base. You can be quite aggressive with this dry brush. You want to get quite a nice big glow effect built up. So yeah, just start out with this deep red and work up all amongst all the rocks everywhere. I went with Mars Orange again and applied the dry brush all around the inside of the fire pit and around the outside edge to sort of get a bit of glow coming through. I did then darken this up with some of the deep red. It was just too orangey. I needed a bit more depth towards sort of the back of the fire pit, so used a bit of the deep red like we did in the previous stage. I then started building up the dry brush layers with Soul Yellow and kept this more towards the sort of outside of the actual fire sort of pit area itself. I got some along the skull and just sort of around the areas to show the bit of the sort of light coming out of the pit. Using Ushabti bone, I then went round all of the skulls and parts of the skeleton, anything that's bone, and just layered those up. Now the skulls in the fire pit here should have a lot more yellow and glow on them, but I did this and then actually really liked how crisp and clean it looked, so I just left it as it was. Using Waywatcher green glaze, I just applied a quick coat over the little bits of stone hanging off, just to give them sort of a bit of colour onto the actual main model itself, and just, you know, a little bit of a glow on them. I highlighted the handles and bits on the base just by using the previous base colours and adding a bit of white to them. So that was deep red and white for the sort of sheaves and handles, and then for the leathery sort of ones, Dubai brown with white. I dry brushed the wooden horns on top of the model with Terminatus stone. I used a thin down Ushabti bone on the straps. This is obviously quite thin, so the dry brushing work shows through. You could do it the other way around and base coat them with a slightly thicker coat and then dry brush over the top of them, and then obviously that would save going back and doing a second dry brush. I did it this way just because I completely forgot I needed to paint the straps, to be honest. But yeah, if you do it thin enough, the dry brush edges will still sort of show through as a nice highlight. You could always go back and pop some extra ones on if you need to. Using Mephiston Red, I painted in all of the little runes across the model. This is quite thin, so it does flow into the recesses nicely, but it is a quite a fine controlled process. So use a decent brush just so you don't spill it all over the rock work around the outside. This is quite a time consuming part because there are a lot of runes to do. I then applied a thinned down lilac oxide over some of the gold and sort of brass looking areas on the base. This is more controlled, not all over, it's just to sort of catch some of the deeper recessed areas on the model, like the eye sockets and you know, the sort of dented parts of the helmets and bits. So finally I do some weathering on the model. I use some matte varnish, some PVA glue, bicarb of soda or baking powder, whichever. The matte varnish stops it colouring sort of, or decolouring or discolouring at a later date. And then I apply Mars orange to give it a nice vibrant rich base colour. It is actually bicarb of soda I use in this one. And then since doing this I've actually swapped over to fine grit chinchilla sand, which is something I picked up from having a chat with Dave Soper recently. He said that in the past when he'd used bicarb it discoloured and went yellow over time. Maybe it's the varnish that I put in mine. I've put UV resistant varnish in and I've never had a problem. 3-4 years I've had stuff with this effect on now and nothing's changed, but I don't know, maybe I don't keep them out in the light enough, or you know, it's unknown to me, but this works and has worked for a long time. But yeah, switching over to chinchilla sand is a good option, because obviously that won't discolour at all, so you're safe in the knowledge that, you know, down the road it's not gonna change. So I fixed this with a nice thick gritty paste. It's a little bit thin at the moment, so I've added some more in. I'm just using the little GW tool to stir it in, and then once it's to the consistency I want, it should stop flowing back in on itself and stay sort of more like a gritty glue, and then you can just use the little tool, pick it up and pop it onto parts of the model that you want. As it dries, the PVA sort of shrinks to the model, pulls all the grit flat to the surface, so it shouldn't really come off unless you quite aggressively rub it with your fingers. But here you can see the sort of consistency you're going for, almost like toothpaste, I guess. So at this point the model is assembled, and then I will just use an old brush to apply our weathering sort of paste onto the various bits of metal to create a rusted, old, battered look. And that is everything done. Also, when I did the fire pit, I also did the eyes at the top of the model with the same dry brushing technique, just to sort of show the glow from the fire coming out of the eyes at the top. I didn't do the 360 rotations of this model like I normally do with my projects I do. This was actually a commission for someone, just as a sort of a starter to an army, like a more table standard project, but it's got a nice overall effect and it's quite easy to achieve, and it didn't take very long, so I thought it was worth recording the video and doing for him. I've attached some stills here of the finished front and back of the model, and you can see it also with the other pieces I did, which was the endless spells. They're very similar to the ones Duncan from GW did, so there was no point in really doing the same videos as him for the bull, and the horn is effectively done in the exact same way as the bull, and the birds themselves are spray black and dry brush grey. There's not really a lot you can do with them unless you paint each individual feather. Hopefully you've enjoyed this video, and it was something a bit different for me to do, because I don't normally do terrain videos. Obviously I've got some endless spell ones I've done, not the beastman ones, some of the generic ones from the malign sorcery set. I'll get those up at some point soon, hopefully. But yeah, if there's anything you want to see in particular, just drop us a message and I'll see what I can do to help out. Cool. Thanks for watching. Thanks for the support. Bye.